I'm sure you are familiar with the phrase Humpty Dumpty and whatever happened to Humpty Dumpty. He was on a wall, he was having fun, he fell down, and he broke. As a kid, I always kind of went with that image, Humpty Dumpty breaking. Things happen. And when we look at cartoons, I'm sure some of you may or may have not, with children, you can see Humpty Dumpty may or may not have been playing. But really what I've come to understand is that symbolizes relationships. Sometimes when you're playing, even if you're having fun, even if things are going, well, fantastic, things break. And the question is, can you put it back together again? We read this week in the Parsha, the law reads, when a man has taken a bride, he shall not go out with the army or be assigned to it for any purpose. He shall be exempt for 1 year for the sake of his household, to give happiness to the woman he has married. The rabbis heard this and thought, fascinating. The new groom and the new bride are supposed to exist together. They're supposed to form a relationship in such a way that Humpty Dumpty is not going to break. But marriage is hard. It takes a lot of work. In fact, it's so hard even to sometimes find the right spouse that there's an entire midrash about it. In a dialogue that's reported by the name of Rabbi Yossi ben Halafta, one of the Mishnah's most prominent sages, and an unnamed Roman woman of rank, the two of them are having a conversation. God created the world in 6 days. What's God doing now? God's resting, God's chilling out. And what do we learn? We learn that that's not what God is doing. Rabbi Yossi says that God is spending all of the time making sure that those marriage matches are actually wonderful, successful matches. And her response is, that's what God is doing? I would like to push the midrash just a little bit further, that it's not just marriage matches that God is busy making, but friend matches that can be happening all over this world, those beautiful, positive relationships. She says, I can do better than what God can do. In fact, I will put all of my male and female slaves together, and in no time, I'll have them all matched for marriage. To which, of course, you can imagine Rav Yossi going, you think it's gonna be so easy? For God to do it was hard. And this is the one who split the Red Sea. Whereupon we find and see that she goes ahead and goes and does exactly just that. She puts all of her slaves in the room, and lo and behold, she comes back the next day and people's hair is disheveled, black and blue eyes. Everybody has had lots of fighting, and one slave even lost an eye. Amazingly, they all reply they didn't like the matches that were assigned to them by her. She didn't do a very good job. She failed to take the eHarmony tests. But how is marriage established? How do we find those good relationships? And I don't mean just marriage relationships only. I mean those friendships that last a long time. In his medieval compilation of the Torah's 613 commandments, Sefer HaChanuch, put together by a medieval Spanish author, lists all of these commandments. And he explains the reason for this particular mitzvah, where the bride and the groom need to be alone for at least a year. And he says that they need to be freed from the distractions of life. They need to become physically compatible. They need to inherently lean in to one another and learn what that actually means. The ideal image being that their words and their hearts are in alignment, because the two benefit from such a deep bonding. Yet, as we know, conflicts arise. Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall. People fight. We bring our own pain, our own trouble, our own baggage into the marriage, which is why when the rabbis and the authors of the Hebrew Bible went to look and say, how do we describe that highest relationship? The only thing, though, that they could turn to was a marriage, at least a marriage image. So when the prophet Isaiah said and described Jerusalem as the bride, God as the groom, by the way, he got it from Hosea and Jeremiah, lots of them played with it, we understood that the destruction of the first temple, the destruction of the northern kingdom, a lot of the pain that the Israelites went through was simply a physical manifestation of the conflict between the bride and the groom, or the conflict between individuals in a very intense relationship. But the important thing that I'm brought to, and why I brought this conversation to your attention this evening, is not just the value of finding that right partner or the value of being in the best friendship relationship that you can find, but what happens when there's a conflict. Because the truth is we're human beings. There's going to be conflict. The Gottman Institute describes and discusses all of their work for premarital counseling, not about avoiding conflict, but really navigating through the conflict, which in the case of this week's Haftorah, to push the metaphor even further, the intimate partnership ebbs and flows. But the point is that between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, we have Haftorot of consolation. And here we see that God's anger, where sometimes we find after a large fight, we'll want to go off into our own corners, hide our face, not be engaging with one another, can, well, be seen to retrospectively understand that what arose as a conflict may only simply be temporary. That the confidence and the reliability of love and trust can in fact be restored. That meaningful reconciliation and healing can happen, but it's not all roses. It happens because the deep feelings of humiliation are actually addressed. It's not about simply saying we had a problem. It's about naming it, addressing it, and finding a path forward. It's about recognizing the need to hold compassionately the shame that we have when we fight. Maybe it's shame around some conflict even within inside of us. Maybe it's feelings of inadequacy. Regardless, the whole point of this time of year is reestablishing that right relationship with God, reestablishing that right relationship with ourselves. It's looking and recognizing that that most intimate relationship, yes, it could be a marriage. It may also be an intimate friendship, and most importantly, it can be a relationship with yourself. After all, self-love is important, and we're kind of in a movement around that one. But the true issue here is not to just simply love yourself, it's to love yourself through the conflict, to love the other dealing with the conflicts that arise in our life, and to do so, in the words and images of Brene Brown, takes courage by telling who you are with a whole heart, compassion by being kind to yourself and others, connection by deeply not being like this when we fight, but moving inward, and lastly, vulnerability by being willing to expose that deep, tender part of who you are. I think we read this section about marriage, about how to form that perfect marriage, the challenges around marriage, because it's not necessarily about marriage. It's truly, though, about intimate relationships with ourselves and others. It's about being who we truly are, in spite of our flaws that bring about at times conflict, and walking through them with grace and compassion so that we can enter a right relationship with ourselves, with other human beings, and with God at this most sacred time of year. Shabbat Shalom.